Many thanks for joining us on the program. This is KTN Prime.
Let's look at the top stories tonight. We begin in Mombasa. Anti-narcotics officers in Mombasa have recovered heroin with a street value of at least 1.1 billion shillings from a vessel that had been under scrutiny.
The heroin weighing 341 kilograms was discovered in the vessel's diesel and water tanks. KTN's Rita Tinina begins our coverage tonight with that report.
Since Kenya Navy forces intercepted the vessel just over 2 weeks ago, anti-narcotics officers at the coast have had their eyes on the vessel quite literally. A search in the vessel's reservoir tank led to a shocking discovery.
We have 341.7 kgs, and from preliminary test results, it is positive for heroin.
The discovery comes only a week after a kilo of heroin was recovered from the same vessel. Investigations on the origin and destination of the stateless vessel are underway. Initial leads suggest that it could have originated from Iran, docked in Pakistan, headed for Mogadishu before it was intercepted on Kenyan waters in the Indian Ocean. Scrutiny of the vessel has seen tests conducted on its water and diesel.
We've been also able to recover 28,600 liters of water, which actually tests positive for heroin. This one was also in the ballast tanks. And also we've recovered 1,800 liters of diesel, which actually had also traces of heroin.
Several suspects, including nationals of Iran, Pakistan and India, are in custody and have already been arraigned in court facing drug trafficking charges. One Pakistani national died in the vessel under unclear circumstances just days after anti-narcotics officers kicked off investigations.
And we are continuing our search until all those possible places which possibly this substance could have been hidden, we are through with them.
The discovery comes less than 3 months after Australian Navy forces intercepted the largest ever heroin haul worth 25 billion shillings in the Indian Ocean in April this year. Rita Tinina, KTN.
6 years after the post-election violence, internally displaced persons are still waiting for justice and reparation. According to an Amnesty International report released today, victims still feel disillusioned and frustrated that perpetrators are still at large. Amnesty International has recommended that the Kenyan government shows its commitment to the process by supporting proceedings at the International Criminal Court and ending efforts to halt prosecutions in Kenya. KTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa has more.
6 years after the post-election violence erupted in Kenya, internally displaced persons still lament that they have been forgotten by the rest of the country. Their plight now reflected in a report released by Amnesty International. The post-election chaos claimed the lives of over 1,000 people and led to the displacement of over 600,000 others. Yet while a section received money from the government and sought to start afresh, others are still languishing in IDP camps, waiting for assistance from the government.
Far too many victims are still waiting for justice, waiting for reparations, and this is clear and beyond doubt in the report.
The views of 49 internally displaced individuals were sought alongside those of civil society groups. The majority revealed that they were frustrated by the knowledge that the perpetrators of the violence were still at large.
With many victims we spoke to saying that they believe they lived in a culture of impunity where there is no point in going to the police because nothing will be done unless you have money.
The IDPs have been following the proceedings at the International Criminal Court with interest, but opinion is divided.
5 of the 49 that we spoke to had concerns with the ICC intervention. They feared that this would disrupt what they believed were government reconciliation efforts. But for the majority, the victims felt supportive of the ICC process because they have not seen any action being taken at national level.
This now prompting Amnesty International to make a raft of recommendations, among them that the country launch further investigations into the 4,000 case files that lack evidence, that the country establishes a reparations program, and as a sign of its commitment, that the Kenyan government cooperate fully with the ICC and end all efforts to halt the ICC's investigations in Kenya. 6 years after the violence that led to their displacement, the internally displaced still wait for promises made to be fulfilled. Wilkis Tanyabwa, KTN.
And that damning report by the Kenyan authorities is in this report released today by Amnesty International. And that story is the basis of our big question tonight. We're asking you, are you satisfied with the prosecution of post-election violence suspects in Kenyan courts? Tell us, what do you think? SMS your yes or no response to the number 22155. You can also join that conversation via Twitter at Ben_Kitili, at Linda Ogutu, and at KTN Kenya. We shall be sampling your views on that very important question tonight. And let's now bring in the Secretary General of the Amnesty International, Salil Shetty. Welcome to our studio, sir.
Thank you.
And why do you think the Kenyan authorities have failed on these 4,000 cases still unresolved related to the 2008 post-election violence, and not much is happening? Why do you think the Kenyan authorities have failed to deliver on this, and what is the way forward for the Kenyan justice system?
Well, I think, what's very distinctive about our research in this report is that we are focused very much on the experiences and the lived realities of victims themselves. I personally met many of them on Sunday, and so if you ask them as to why there has been no justice for such a long time, I think one of the things they're very clear about is that there's been a climate of fear which has been created, so they are not even able to report to the authorities. They are feeling nervous about reprisals. So and justice delayed, as you know, is justice denied. So as time passes by, it's more difficult to get the evidence. But it is outrageous for the Director of Public Prosecution to say that for 4,000 cases they're not able to find enough evidence. They really need to go back and reinvestigate and open up these cases. I think most Kenyans would say that 6 years later, 1,000 people lost their lives, more than 500,000 people displaced. People have waited for too long. It's time for action.
Your report also mentioned reparation, but before we go to that, let's take a look at what's happening internationally at the International Criminal Court. The Kenyan cases, we have seen a situation where there seems to be no sufficient evidence for the prosecutor, Fatu Bensouda, to be able to prosecute these two cases. Is it coming down to the local scene? I mean, what is happening at the ICC? No evidence. Is it the same thing mirroring what is happening in the country?
In some ways, yes. I mean, that's one of the things which the victims themselves have talked about. I think the majority of the victims we interviewed still feel that the ICC process is important. But the highlight of this report is that if the Kenyan government is serious about fighting impunity and putting an end to this historic injustice, then what we need to do is to also ensure that all the crimes which are not being dealt with by the ICC, which are local level prosecution of crimes which have taken place, those cannot be ignored anymore. A lot of this is violence by the local police, by criminal gangs attached to political militias. The number of women who have talked to us who have been raped, and the person who raped them is actually still living in the same vicinity. So you can imagine the climate of fear that this creates. So yes, ICC is a challenge. I mean, Amnesty's position on the ICC ongoing cases is clear. We believe the Kenyan government should fully cooperate. They claim to be cooperating, but the ICC doesn't think so.
As Amnesty International, do you think the Kenyan government is cooperating with the ICC?
Well, according to the Office of the Prosecutor, they're not. So I think, I met with the Attorney General as well. He's insisting that he's fully cooperating, but there's enough reporting to show that witnesses are feeling intimidated. And the Kenyan government is also, at the Africa Union level and at the ICC level, pushing for heads of state to have immunity and senior officials to have immunity. That defeats the very purpose of the International Criminal Court. Kenya is a signatory to the Rome Statute, and they have to meet their obligations.
What would you say is the effect of the Kenyan Parliament's bid or efforts to try and remove Kenya from the Rome Statute to these cases and to justice for the victims?
I think it's not in line with what the people of Kenya and the people of Africa want. I mean, we have to really understand that the people of Africa, particularly the victims of injustice, not just in Kenya but in other countries, are really crying for justice. That's what our report is talking about. And our recommendations are clear. You know, we have a Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission report which has come out a long time ago. What is stopping the Kenyan government from implementing the recommendations and creating a national reparation program? Because the Kenyan government is constantly telling us it's a national issue, don't bring Western powers, don't bring the International Criminal Court, we'll sort it out. So our report is saying that's great, please sort it out. Until 6 years later, your national justice system has still not delivered for the people of Kenya.
What are the consequences of failing to provide justice for the victims of the 2008 post-election violence or delaying that justice? What are the consequences?
Well, you know, I think Kenya has been quite fortunate that since February 2008, there's been relative stability and peace. But you can't take this for granted. If you listen to the voices of the victims, they're losing hope, they're getting annoyed, they're getting agitated. So the only road to peace and reconciliation and stability and economic development is through justice, accountability and reparations. This is international experience. There's no shortcut to this.
I'm talking about reparation, finally, Secretary General. As Amnesty International, what are you doing to make sure that there's reparation? Because it's very important, just as important as justice, experts would say. So what are you doing as Amnesty International to make sure you are by the victims' side?
Well, you know, one thing that's very important to understand is that Amnesty International is a people's movement. We are not funded by governments or corporations from the West. We raise money from public. More than 3 million people who give small donations to Amnesty. It's made of members, including Kenyan members across Africa. So what Amnesty does about reparations is to remind the government and remind the people of Kenya to be accountable and to do what they've promised to do. So national reparations program is overdue. We'll continue to raise this. We'll continue to put pressure. I think Kenyans deserve better. The victims of the post-election violence deserve better. So we hope the government will hear our voice and take action now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Salil Chetty, Secretary General of Amnesty International, on this report, Crying for Justice, talking about those issues surrounding the 2008 post-election violence. And as we have told you, that is the basis of a big question tonight. Tell us, are you satisfied with the prosecution of post-election violence suspects in our courts? Let's now move on. And after years of deadlock and division, the Church of England has voted to allow women to become bishops, overturning centuries of tradition. The church, which is the mother church of the worldwide Anglican communion, including the Anglican Church of Kenya, now charts a new path in its leadership. But what does this mean for the Kenyan Anglican Church? KTN's Sharon Momanyi reports.
Reverend Lydia Mwaniki is a spiritual leader in the Anglican Church of Kenya. In 2012, Lydia felt the call to serve the church in a higher capacity. Unfortunately, it was a call whose time had not come.
The reason that we do not have bishops in the Anglican Church of Kenya is mainly because they follow the tradition of the church, and also they bring in theological arguments, and they are also controlled by culture, where it is argued that women were never leaders.
But circumstances may just be different for Lydia and other women seeking to be bishops in the Anglican Church. On Monday, the Mother Church of England overcame intense divisions to pass a vote to allow female bishops, ending 500 years of a ban on ordaining women. The vote took place at a meeting of the ruling General Synod in York, the legislation getting approval by the required 2/3 majority.
In favor 162, against 25, 4 abstentions.
The yes vote comes 18 months after a previous attempt was blocked.
The 12 disciples, it is argued that they were all male. And so because they were all male, Jesus did not intend that any woman becomes a leader in the church. But when we look at the choosing of the 12, Jesus was not in any way choosing priests.
Women serve as bishops in community churches in several countries, including the United States, Australia, and Canada. But some Anglican churches in developing countries do not even ordain women as priests. Some analysts view this historical decision by the Anglican Church to mean that the Church has acknowledged the importance placed on gender equality, largely by the secular world. Sought for a comment on how this legislation will impact the Anglican Church of Kenya, Archbishop Eliud Wabukala said he will give his feedback on Wednesday morning. Sharma Manyi, KTN Prime.
Well, you're watching KTN Prime. Thank you for staying with us. Let's take you to the insecurity in Lamu now. And the Kenya Defence Forces have raided Boni Forest, where militants behind the Lamu killings are suspected to be hiding.
Occasional loud explosions at the forest have sparked panic among area residents as the KDF operation goes on. Ian Wafula has that report.
Occasional bangs from the explosives being dropped by the Kenya Defence Forces have filled the air around Lamu County's Boni Forest. Constant patrols on the ground and drones alongside helicopters in the air have also characterized parts of the county. This in a bid to flush out a gang that has been behind the killings witnessed in the county and is said to be taking refuge in the forest. Tension has been high among Lamu residents, even as the area county commissioner tried to assure them that the security agencies have taken control.
Tunawasaka popote walipo, hata kama ni hiyo Boni Forest, wamekuwa kijidai kwamba wana nguvu nyingi sana za kijeshi, lakini tunaamini kwamba sisi kama serikali hakuna nguvu ambayo itaweza kutushinda, na kwa hivyo mahali tunakutana nao haijalishi ni nguvu gani wanatumia, na ndio mnasikia tukipambana nao huko. Kwa hivyo hiyo kazi tunaifanya na tutaifanya mpaka tuhakikishe kwamba tumewaangamiza wote.
The Lamu Governor Issa Timami, accompanied by members of parliament, welcomed the ongoing operation and asked residents to cooperate.
Ninawaomba watu wasikae wakieneza uvumi. Saa nyingine watu mpaka wanaeneza uvumi ambayo inazidi kutia hofu na wasiwasi kwa wananchi wetu wa Lamu.
It is estimated that the attacks by the militants have seen over 80 people dead in a span of 3 weeks. Ian Wafula, KTN.
Right, let's look at a story that caused quite a stir. Prophet David Owor made a dramatic return into the country after what his ministry says was a miraculous revival meeting in Congo-Brazzaville. The prophet landed at JKA this evening in Congo's presidential jet. He was received by members of the Repentance and Holiness ministries, including the Council of Bishops, overseers, pastors, and the congregation. They had lined up at the airport from as early as 4 p.m. to welcome him. Denis Sassou Nguesso, the president of Congo-Brazzaville, had released his private jet to bring back to Kenya Dr. Owor, as told by sources from his ministry. Well, this, according to the sources, was in appreciation of the series of miracles witnessed in Congo since the prophet's arrival and series of meetings from July 10th to July 14th.
President of Congo gave him a special jet to take him back here in Kenya, and he asked me to come with him to make sure that the man of God is safe.
He was the first person to receive the message, and then he repented and received the Lord right there when he received the message. And then after that, he mobilized the entire country, the big meeting in Brazzaville, and he asked in the National Assembly. He opened up the parliament and he said, give the message in the National Assembly. And then after that, in Pointe-Noire, he mobilized also. And after that, this morning, he called me to the State House to meet with him, just to find out how was the reception on the message and to bid me farewell.
One would say, what an entry. Let's look at our big question tonight. We had asked you, are you satisfied with the prosecution of post-election violence suspects in Kenyan courts? Welcome back. Thank you for staying with KTN.
Now, I did report about the insecurity in Lamu, and that struggle by the security agencies to contain runaway insecurity in the country is one of the reasons the opposition was demanding national dialogue with the Jubilee government.
The court fraternity now says they want a referendum and not dialogue. As Wilson Mburu reports, even governance experts are divided on what the way forward is for the country.
After the surprise turnaround from demands for dialogue to calls for referendum last week, the opposition coalition says it has already formulated questions that will be used in a referendum, never mind the fact that would be the prerogative of the IEBC. Speaking on KTN's talk show Checkpoint on Sunday, however, Edwin Sifuna, who is a member of CORD's legal team, said the referendum is just one of many issues that they are raising.
We're going to identify the issues that actually can go to Mwananchi, issues to do with the devolution, for instance.
Governance experts seem divided on the issue, with Osano Kute saying involving the people in a referendum is one way of solving problems, while Professor Kitila Naitule argues that this is getting priorities wrong.
I'm not so sure about, whether just zeroing in on the 13 issues that were mentioned by CORD is what really should make us go for the referendum. But having gone through the Constitution, I know there are quite a number of issues that really needs to be, ironed out, because we have a lot of operational structure problems in the country.
And I would appreciate if the opposition can amplify exit from Somalia as opposed to looking for a referendum where there is no issue to take to the public.
President Uhuru Kenyatta has once again called on the CORD leaders to sit down with him and talk, but CORD principal Moses Wetangula has dismissed the call, saying his statement has been overtaken by events. However, Kute disagrees with CORD's position to discard dialogue, saying it is the only way forward.
It's for us to really sit down as a people and ask ourselves, what exactly is the problem in this country? Where should we go? How do we solve those problems without necessarily looking at who is to blame for those problems?
At the end of the day, Kenyans can only wait and see whether this is indeed a fight for their rights or a supremacy battle between the two political sides. Wilson Buru, KTN Prime.
The Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board has sacked 3 magistrates and retained 38 others in the ongoing vetting exercise for magistrates. The board's chairman, Sharad Rao, said some of the issues uncovered during the vetting process included unexplained bank deposits, poor writing skills, and lack of an internal audit mechanism to monitor and appraise the performance of judicial officers.
The Judges and Magistrates Board has vetted over 200 judicial officers since the vetting process began in February 2011. Giving their verdict in relation to 41 magistrates Tuesday, the board's chairman Sharad Rao said 3 were found unsuitable to continue working in the judiciary. The dismissed magistrates are Sogomo Gadhogo, Maisiba Innocent Toyo, and Orenge Isaac Karasi. Gadhogo was based in Moyale. The board says that he was abusive and used derogatory language in court. Besides, the board said Gadhogo had failed to satisfactorily explain his financial transactions.
The general impression that the board had from his interview was the magistrate was short-tempered and abrasive.
In determining Maisiba's unsuitability, the board said it was alleged by a complainant that Maisiba conducted court proceedings while drunk. The Judicial Service Commission had also notified the board that they had received complaints about the magistrate's habitual drunkenness and had warned him about it, but the magistrate denied the claims.
The board examined the magistrate's past work record. The board finds that the magistrate's record keeping is wanting. The magistrate court records are incomplete and confusing.
The board questioned Orege over claims that he continued to receive a salary from the Lands Ministry for a period of 3.5 months after he resigned, despite having joined the judiciary. On technicality, the board said Orege was earning double salary. In his defense, the magistrate said that his file was not transferred to the judiciary immediately as he had requested, and as a result, he was not able to get a salary from the judiciary.
The Ministry of Lands tracked him in 2010, 2 years later, and asked him to pay, and he still did not pay. It took the intervention of the judiciary to cause him to pay the amount.
The board also took issue with Justice Mumbi Ngugi's ruling in March this year that the board was overstepping its mandate in entertaining complaints which arose after adoption of the new constitution in August 2010.
Corruption cannot have a timeline.
The sacking of the 3 brings the number of judges and magistrates found unsuitable since the commencement of the vetting exercise 3 years ago to 32. Patrick Amimo, KTN.
Thank you for staying with us. This is KTN Prime Time. Now take a look at what's happening in business. I take you to our business center where Bonnie Tunya is standing by. And Bonnie, I understand there's some good news for the Kenya Revenue Authority, which of course means more work for the taxpayer.
Right, it's good news for them and bad news for us. For the first time in 6 years, KRA has surpassed its targets, collecting in excess of 163 billion over and above what they were meant to collect. But I have the details.
You're watching KTN Prime.
This is business. My name is Bonnie Tunya. The Kenya Revenue Authority has, for the first time in 6 years, met its revenue targets. Not only did the KRA meet and surpass its target, it also grew revenue collection by a whopping 163 billion shillings. The taxman is now gearing up for even better collections in the year 2014-2015 financial year as it expands its tax base. Here's Adelaide Changole.
The Kenya Revenue Authority collected 963.8 billion shillings for the full year ending June 2014, barely surpassing the target of 963.7 billion shillings, but posting a 20.4% jump from the 805 billion shillings posted in the 2012-2013 financial year. The collection was 10 billion shillings shy of the initial target of 973.5 billion shillings, which was revised downwards as a result of slow economic growth.
Initial forecast was 5.5. The actual has turned out to be lower, the estimate being a negative impact on revenue of 12 billion.
The growth in revenue collection was driven by the new value-added tax law, which saw customs duty jump from 258.7 billion to 331.8 billion in the 2013-2014 financial year. However, the recent introduction of excise duty on keg beer hurt tax revenues after volumes plummeted, costing the government 3.3 billion in indirect tax in the process. The agency has now unveiled an aggressive plan to net more revenues as it seeks to raise 1.12 trillion shillings for the 2014-2015 financial year, a 16.4% jump from the current year's collection. For starters, KRA will be targeting donor-funded projects, which will now have to remit VAT to the taxman to stem revenue leakages.
Whether a project has got a donor component or it doesn't have, we treat the project the same way, so that the VAT is raised. And the government will fund that component of the VAT. And the money then is collected and accounted for.
The agency is also strengthening investigations into tax avoidance from multinationals in the country through the shifting of profits to low-tax jurisdictions. So far, KRA is recovering 25 billion shillings from international companies that a recent audit showed were involved in transfer pricing.
And we are trying to, seal the loophole so that whatever charges that are being made by the multinationals are actually at arm's length, so that we don't end up in a situation where profits are being shipped from Kenya to other jurisdictions.
The agency is hoping these initiatives will provide the impetus needed to buoy revenues beyond the 1 trillion shilling psychological mark in this financial year. Adelaide Changole, KTN Business.
Well, let's go to aviation now. And the Kenyan government is still pursuing the possibility of having direct flights to the United States, something that has proved elusive in the past. The Ministry of Transport says that this time round, it has upped their quality of security screening and passenger handling, as well as general security at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and it is optimistic of getting the American Aviation Authority to clear the airport as secure. Here is KTN's Charles Gitonga.
For years, the government has been itching to get direct flights to the US with little success, owing to the stringent security guidelines issued by the US government. But the September fire at JKIA might just have been the jolt needed to enhance security at the airport. The government is investing 1.3 billion shillings in boosting security at JKIA. And today, the US government stepped in with a 61.4 million grant for security equipment as its Transport Security Administration team carries out an audit at the airport.
The government of Kenya is most keen on this audit, not only because it is a key step to getting direct flights to the US from JKIA, but also because any gaps noted, all recommendations made will be expeditiously implemented to ensure that our flight paths are secure.
TSA has not given a specific date when they plan to conclude the process, but is expected to compile a report of their findings and present them to the government of Kenya.
Normally, after an evaluation is conducted, it's usually about 60 days, and that report is made directly to the government of Kenya.
Kenya is seeking to acquire Category 1 status for its airports to guarantee the possibility of having direct flights to United States. The 61.4 million shillings grant is in form of security equipment that will enable authorities to detect explosives and explosive-making compounds, enabling them to screen more passengers.
The 20 desktop ETD machines with consumables will be distributed to improve security in all our airports, with at least 10 of them being given to JKIA, and the rest will be distributed among the other airports.
This gesture is in line with global security upgrades being undertaken elsewhere in the world.
US-based airlines have been eyeing Kenya as a potential growth market. Delta Airways was set to launch direct flights in 2009, but was forced to pull out after the US government denied it permission to launch flights. Charles Gitonga, KTN Business.
Local farmers must incorporate conventional business ethics in their operations if they are to attract the much-needed credit from financing institutions. Now, this comes as the African countries look for innovative ways to finance the sector, with the Kenyan government committing to lower interest rates of loans to the sector to single digits. Here is KTN's Philip Keitani.
For developing economies
Despite being made up of economies that rely on agriculture and spending in excess of $35 billion in food imports, Africa is still besieged by persistent cases of food shortages and starvation.
We know there are some tax regimes that always makes the sector very expensive, very unattractive. Again, that is where finance comes in.
The high interest rate charged by banks and other financial institutions are listed among the biggest stumbling blocks to the growth of the agricultural sector. But now the government of Kenya is stepping in to provide affordable loans to farmers so as to allow for the expansion and modernization of the sector, which would unlock the nascent potential in the sector.
How do you allow millions of Africans to work for a few people? We're literally slaves. I mean, somebody must do the right thing.
Players in the agricultural sector are also being challenged to find other ways of raising funds, while banks and other financial institutions are to form a risk-sharing facility that will provide cheaper loans to farmers.
The shortage of credit financing, together with other constraints, has led to rapid decline in adoption of the majority of improved technologies and practices needed to raise agricultural productivity and to generate higher incomes.
Meanwhile, the government is encouraging players in the private sector to be more assertive in demanding for low interest rates so as to ensure faster economic growth in the sector. Philip Keitan, KTN Business.
Well, that wraps up business for today, but not before we look at how your money has been working for you in the Money Market Report coming up next on the Financial Market Review. Well, that's business. My name is Boni Tunya. Good night.
Street value of at least 1.1 billion Kenya shillings from a vessel that had been under scrutiny. The heroin weighing 341 kilograms was discovered in the vessel's diesel and water tanks. Now, the big question we're asking you, are you satisfied with the prosecution of post-election violence suspects in Kenyan courts?
At Calvin Ski says, not at all. The Kenyan justice system failed post-election violence victims. You, mainstream Kenyan media, ignored the issue.
A big no, there is no justice in Kenya. Paul Anwani says, in Kenyan courts, remember, president and deputy are suspects who will bring force.
Rufus Omwega says the justice system in Kenya needs to be chastised to give the term its meaning, otherwise it's not.
Keep them coming. The number is 22155 on Twitter, at Ben_Kitili, at Linda Ogutu, and at KTN Kenya. We'll take a short break, but don't go too far. When we come back, Lynn Washira will be coming with the latest in sports. Don't go too far. This is KTN Prime.
A very good evening and a warm welcome to KTN Sports. I'm Lynn Washira. We kick off the bulletin here at home, where Kenya's 10,000 meters team to the Commonwealth Games will be capitalizing on reports that double Olympic and world champion Mo Farah may not be fit to take part in the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, Scotland. The Kenyan 10,000 meters trio has been training at the Kasarani Stadium, and hopes for podium finish remain high.
The only one in the squad who has represented Kenya before. Kirui was part of the 2011 Daegu World Championships, and he says he's ready to make up for his 6th place finish 3 years ago.
Our bodies remain the way it is now. I think we are coming home with something.
Kirui's first love is road races, and is remembered for having set the pace for Wilson Kipsang's record-breaking race in Berlin. Josephat Bet is another athlete who specializes on the road races, but is looking forward to making a mark on the track.
Tumechaguliwa 10,000. Tunasikizana, tunafanya mazoezi tangu tufika hapa Kasarani, na tuko pamoja mpaka siku ya leo, na tunaona tuko timu kabisa. Mo Farah is like somebody like me, and I saw Mo Farah in London, so it's like us, only fear. So we are praying now, fear will move away from us.
Generally, the Kenyan team is well aware of their weaknesses and has been working towards filling the gaps.
So we are now building on power finish, mostly in 200 meters. We are now building up those parts that we are so weak.
The 2010 Kenyan team won a silver and bronze medal.
And Kenya played to a barren draw with the visiting Burundi national football team in an international friendly at the Nyayo National Stadium. Victor Wanyama was red-carded in the match 12 minutes after coming in for what the referee said was due to an supporting off-the-ball incident. The hosts created chances, but they were far better, and most of which missed the target. Kenya even missed a penalty after Paul Kyongera's spot kick was dealt with by Burundi keeper Innocent Bonikakuye. Coach Adel Amrush shuffled his team in the second half in a bid to build a team to face Lesotho away, but these strategies never provided a score. Stars used the match to prepare for this weekend's second-round Africa Cup of Nations qualifier against Lesotho. And well, the 7th edition of the Africa University Games entered its 4th day in Nairobi, with host Kenya registering positive results compared to their competitors. In the 10,000 meters men's race, it was an East African affair where Calvin Chemweno won in a time of 30 minutes, 31.5 seconds to beat Peter Nyeno and Benjamin Njia of Uganda, who came in 3rd. A similar result was replicated in the men's 5,000 meters race.
Johila Musa of Egypt and Akan Jalep of Uganda, and Collins Muma from Kenya.
Por esse prêmio do Estado, e Bivinava Smith da África do Sul.
And the new FIFA World Champions Germany arrived in Berlin this morning to a rousing welcome mounted by hundreds of thousands of jubilant fans. It was Germany's 4th world title and the first under the reunified Germany. The flag-waving crowd, which began gathering before dawn, erupted in applause under warm summer sunshine when the triumphant players arrived from Rio de Janeiro. Team members wearing black shirts embellished with the number 1 took the stage in groups to greet ecstatic supporters. Germany defeated Argentina in Sunday's final to lift the trophy. Mario Götze who scored the only goal, called Germany's win a dream. Now we head to Nakuru, where the local sitting volleyball club has a reason to smile after students from Defence Technical Undergraduate Scheme of the British Army offered to build them a modern court at the Afraha Open Grounds in Nakuru County. Projects Abroad Kenya County Director Boniface Kibunja Karanja presented the plight of the team, which has been conducting its operations in the open, and the county government was the first to respond. The county's Minister for Education, Culture and Sports, Professor Catherine Kitetu, says the project will be completed in 2 weeks. Nakuru Sitting Volleyball is led by Nicholas Mushemi. The club produced 2 national team players that took part in the African Paralympic Volleyball Championships won by host Morocco in May this year.
Challenge ambayo tumekuwa nayo imekuwa pale pa kuchezea mambo na kuja kutrain kwa kujua wenzetu wenye wako hapa wengi wao ni wale ambao wako kwa jua kali sector. So lazima mtu ajisacrifice ndio akuje acheze hapa kidogo halafu turudi kwa kutafuta.
And that's how we wrap up tonight's edition of KTN Sports. I'm Lane Washira. Do have a good night, but do stay with us. Ben Kitili and Linda Ogutu will be back to wrap up KTN Prime.
Great. So in a report that was released by Amnesty International today, they gave the account of justice that has been received by post-election violence survivors in the country. And that formed the basis of a big question we asked you. Are you satisfied with the prosecution of post-election violence suspects in Kenyan courts? Jacob Nyaundi says post-election violence victims will never get justice. Money and power have a way to circumvent the justice system.
And of course, that is the poll results. A majority of you, 81% say no, and only 19% say yes. Bernarda Buga says no, the evidence so far presented before courts by the police appears to be incompetent to sustain cases.
At Kenya Zulu says, I feel for the victims, but they should know there is justice and the law. The two are like oil and water.
And Okontito says, no, actually the big question is reminding us that the cases are ongoing. Media should air them live.
Any more? Do you have
Colin Sika, yes, says of course not, maybe even, especially when the post-election violence victims seem to be insignificant fish.
All right, finally for at F. Okago says, guilt stroke innocence become irrelevant in criminal trial as we flounder in artificial law poorly conceived.
And Bernard Baroi finally says, no, not at all. I believe the government could have done better in this area. No criminals should be spared.
Those are your thoughts. Thank you for contributing, for being part of this bulletin. We'll see you tomorrow. Sleep well. I'm Linda Ogutu.
And I'm Ben Kitili. Many thanks for joining us on the program tonight. Good night from the Standard Group Center.